to start unpacking content and skills from standards using the protocol, underlining the verbs and highlighting the nouns, is to get right into a Word document, or if you're using a software, and cut and paste the standard right into a template and begin deleting and moving things around. I do this as a rough unpack experience. It's not complete. It always can use more revision, but it really gets into the process quickly. So let's take a look. And we're going to just try a couple of different content areas. In our story here, I have some science, ELA, math, and PE. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into the standard, and I'm going to cut and paste it into my template. I tend to start on the side of content. And what I want to do first is just set up the heading and set up the structure. So because this is science, it looks like the heading I have here is molecules to organisms and structures and processes. I tend to keep the headings in their entirety. So I'm just going to give myself a little A right next to that. Personally, I also like to bold it. So now I'm going to come down into my actual standard. I don't keep the standard numbers or coding. I don't want that in my content and skills. And I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste the original, now that it's in my format, into my skills. So now I'm going to go over and I'm going to start numbering. A1, construct an explanation based on evidence for how the structure of DNA determines the structure of protein. Okay, so construct an explanation. They also have to look at this idea of DNA determining the structure of proteins. I think they're going to have to do something with that. I might have an A2 there. Okay, but then, which carry out the essential functions of life through the systems of specialized cells. Oh, they might have to list some items there too. I'm going to go back over into my content now, and I'm going to start deleting some pieces here. I want to see what the raw content is in terms of a key idea or a concept. So I have construct an explanation. I don't need any of those words because that's actually part of my skill. So now, based on evidence for how the structure of DNA, they're going to have to learn about the structure of DNA. So I'm going to start my bullets now. Here we go. They need to understand the structure of DNA. And they also need to know that the structure of DNA determines, they need to know the structure of proteins. Now we have this idea that they're going to carry out, but I have to know what essential functions of life are, okay, the essential functions of life through systems, and I still need to know about these specialized cells. So now I've got my raw footage for my content. Structure of DNA, structure of proteins. But these last two bullets, I might need to reflect on and work with my colleagues. Is it actually content, the essential functions of life through systems? Or is it just the idea of systems of specialized cells? That's something where we could have a conversation. This is work I could do at a PLC. This is something that we could revisit and look at our materials. At this point, I might say I'm going to keep it as it is. But again, like I said, this is a rough unpack. I do it the first time this way. I can always come back and work on it. So now let's see again what the students have to do with this. They have to construct an explanation based on evidence for how the structure of DNA. Okay, so they have to construct an explanation based on evidence. That's one skill. A child might be able to do that and might not be able to do that. The other thing they have to do, though, is they have to explain how the structure of DNA determines the structure of proteins. Then there's another skill going on here. They actually have to describe how proteins carry out the essential functions of life through systems of specialized cells. These are complex skills. What I tend to do is bold that initial verb. They have to construct an explanation, they have to explain the relationship between DNA and proteins, and they have to describe how the proteins actually impact the essential functions of life. Now that I have it at this level, I feel like I've got my 3 skills that I need to align to assessment evidence. And that is an initial rough unpack. Okay, so let's move on to ELA. And I'm going to do the same thing I did in the first round, only I'm going to show you a slightly different way to do it. I can take the whole heading and the standard at the same time. Again, I'm going to put my A in for text types and purposes. Usually in this case, with these particular standards, my heading here would be writing. So this particular standard comes from the Common Core State Standards for Literacy. So the headings I tend to use in my unpacking are the reading informational, reading literature, reading foundations for K through 5, writing, speaking and listening, and language. I tend to use those for my alpha heading. But then whenever I have a subheading like text types and purposes, I'm going to bold it. I'm going to do that because I want to really carry those features all the way through because they align to standards-based grading and reporting features like report cards. I want to make sure it's organized that way. It also stops what I call the mega list of content. I'm going to delete the actual standard. Again, I don't keep standard codes in my unit plan content and skill areas. Now that I have my standard set up, I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste it over into my skills, just like I did with my first standard. Now that I'm here, something to point out. In our example today, I'm focusing in on what's called W2, which is the informational. So my students here, I'm going to be writing an informational. But I'm only using part A, which is about the introduction. In general, we would unpack A, B, C, and D. But for demonstration purposes, we're going to focus in on just this piece. So if I go in to introduce a topic, I'm going to start right away, just clicking enter. I need to have a topic. So I'm going to delete introduce. They have to have complex ideas. They need to learn about concepts. They need to be interacting with information. It's an informational. I need them to have formatting. Now, anytime I have EGs or IEs, these are elements that are giving me more details. I keep all of them in content. Do not carry them over to skills. Skills get oversaturated as it is. So any extra material you can find, keep it over in that content, please do. Another thing to note, when I'm working through these kinds of standards in writing, what happens is I get redundancy. I might see a topic several times in that A, B, C, and D, especially in writing. Go ahead and delete the extra ones. I don't have to keep them here in my list of content. I want all of this material to be approachable. Remember, I want a teacher to be able to look at the content and skills quickly and know exactly what lesson plans they're going after. Let's keep going. They need to have some graphics. Again, keep the EG. Oh, and they need multimedia. Let's go over to the skills. What does the student actually need to do? Now, something to note again with this standard in particular and the text types and purposes standards. There's sometimes what's called an overarching or anchor standard at the top, or even a descriptor where they just say, write informationals. I don't want to sit here and have a skill called write an informational. It's not detailed enough for me. So if you find yourself unpacking one of those anchor standards by accident or one of those headers, you're going to find out right away because when you get to this part, it's just going to feel so huge. Delete it. You don't need to unpack that. But this, it says introduce a topic. That's precise. So I'm going to put A1, introduce a topic. What else do they need to do? Go to the next verb, hit enter. A2. They have to organize complex ideas, concepts, and information. Next, A3. They have to make important connections. Oh, but they also need to make distinctions. That's a separate skill. So when I have an and here, a child might be able to make an important connection, but not necessarily to make an important distinction. So I'm going to hit enter, put an A4, and just say, make important distinction. It's a separate skill. I might even assess it a separate way. Let's go ahead and close these pieces. Now it also says include formatting. All right, what's observable and measurable here? What does that mean, include formatting? So maybe they have to revise for formatting. Now, revise for formatting, and then A6, now we've got these graphics. So they have to create graphics. Again, I'm going to delete the EG because I already have it. Now, create graphics. Now, it says multimedia. You don't want to think about this. It's and multimedia. So create graphics to aid in comprehension. And I even have an A7 where they create, I'm just going to say media. Media to aid in comprehension. Which means I'm deliberately going into this writing and I'm thinking, what kinds of data tables would help my reader? Or what kind of images or music, if I'm doing that, or a video am I going to be doing, or sculpture, let's go for it, that's going to help aiding in comprehension. Again, I can't say it enough, I'm going to bold my actual verbs. I want to make it so easy for a teacher to come into my unit plan and see exactly what a student is expected to do with the content. And that one's ready to go. All right. Hopefully you're getting the rhythm, but we do want to model as many content areas as possible. So I'd like to go into math, and then we're going to wrap up with a PE example. For a math example of unpacking, I am again going to highlight the whole piece. I'm going to cut and paste it down into content. For those of you who've been watching all along, you can sing in if you know the words. Now, in this story, let's note, again, just like with the ELA, the actual A heading, I tend to focus in on the domain. So in this case, it's SSH. This is algebra. So I'm going to keep my seeing structure in expressions, but I might put in a heading like algebra. And the reason why I do that is because at the high school level with math, they don't have courses organized out the same way the other grade levels do. They have conceptual categories. So they'll have all of algebra, but in any given unit, they might have algebra standards, function standards, geometry standards. So having that little subheading put in there can really help you organize your material. So I'm going to go ahead and bold that, and I'm going to delete that standard. I don't want that piece sitting there with me. But before I start deleting anything inside, I take the whole item and paste it over into skills. There's a rhythm to unpacking that you're going to start getting very fluent in. But now I can come back and I can look at these pieces, and I'm going to start saying, what do they need here? I've derived the formula for the sum of a finite geometric series. So I need a formula, and I also have a finite geometric series. They give me a parenthetical. When the common ratio is not 1, I leave that right in content. Never delete examples. Don't delete the explanations they give you. Teachers need that when they're looking at a unit plan. And last but not least, we've got some problems. I'm going to delete that because that, even though they're nouns, they're qualifiers for a skill. So what I have is I have a formula. I'm going to go ahead and bullet this. There we go. And I've got the finite geometric series. Coming back over to the skills, let's start right off in front of the first verb. I have an A1, derive the formula for the sum of a finite geometric series. Now I've got that same parenthetical. I'm going to delete that because I already have it in content. Go in front of use, hit enter. I got my A2. Use the formula to solve problems. This is a classic case where we have to come in and look at this and say, is that verb use? Is that verb really the verb that I'm looking for evidence of? Is it that I need them to use the formula, or is it that I need them to solve problems? All right. Some people would solve this situation by going in front of solve, hit enter, and go A3. And now they have 3 skills: derive a formula, use the formula, and solve problems. But using the formula is a little difficult to observe and measure. So either I have to come up with another verb where they have to describe the formula or explain the formula, or what I can do is just do a little flip-flop here. So watch this. I can take the solve problem, I can put it in front of the use, and I can say, you know what? The real thing I'm going to get evidence of is their ability to solve problems, and then here it comes, using the formula. I'm back to having 2 skills. I can make them observable and measurable, and just with that little bit of a flip-flop, and so many of the math standards do this where they say use, and it's not observable and measurable. Now, I can bold my verbs, and I'm ready to start talking about assessments. PE, unpacking a PE standard. I'm going to do the same thing we've been doing. I'm going to cut and paste the whole piece right down into my content area. I give it a heading. I'm going to bold it, and I'm going to delete my actual standard marker. Cut and paste the whole thing over, and now I'm ready to start unpacking. Uses movement concepts and principles, e.g. Now I'm going to delete the uses, and I've got movement concepts, and then in PE I tend to have movement principles. I have movement concepts, principles, and knowledge. I'm not going to overly break these up. Now this is where a teacher might say, well, I automatically break these up, right, into movement concepts and movement principles. This is where we would need to meet as a group and maybe talk to our PLC and say, well, are concepts and principles here distinguished? So if I work in the visual arts and I have my the principles of art and then I have the elements of art, well, those are 2 totally separate lists. So splitting it up like this would make sense. But if I have concepts and principles and they're exactly the same thing, then I would not split them up. Now in this case, I'm just going to use this as an example and say I can keep them because it says e.g. force, motion, and rotation, and I'm going to keep them together. But then we have performance of self and others in a selected skill. I don't know what that selected skill is. Normally, I might have selected skill as another item, and then as a bulleted list, I might put some items here. So if I think about a grade level here, this is for 9-10. So I might be focusing in on certain skills. At this time, this is not precise enough. So this is exactly the point where a teacher would have to start generating samples of their content, the selected skills I might be doing here. So in this case, let's pretend they're doing a physical fitness unit. And so the selected skills might be the bent arm hang. They might choose to do a flex test. Okay, so these are 2 skills that they're going to be working on. And I'm going to go ahead and bullet all of these. So watch what we do here. We bullet all of them equally. But because I put 2 items in underneath one, I'm going to go ahead and move them in so that people can tell these are subcategories of something I put into one category of content. Now moving over here, what are the skills that the students have to do with these pieces? The first one, A, uses movement concepts and principles. Okay, and then the second piece I have, 2, I'm going to go in front of analyze. They have to analyze something, and they have to actually improve performance. Now we got to think about these skills. Let's begin. Uses movement concepts and principles is not going to cut it for me. What exactly do they have to do? Well, if I'm a phys ed teacher and I'm thinking about the movement concepts and principles, I needed to be a little bit more precise. They gave me force and motion and rotation. If we're doing a bent arm hang, I'm going to need to give myself something precise here too. So maybe they have to throw a ball. So uses, in this case, is not going to be observable and measurable enough. Maybe they have to demonstrate how to throw a ball safely and correctly. And maybe there's even another A2. Now this is where a teacher would have to generate the skill. Maybe they have to describe the steps for throwing a ball safely and effectively. I like effectively better than correctly because technically, right? Depends. So let's go with effectively. I don't know if they're throwing a baseball or a football, you know, let's have fun. So in that sense, I'm going to go ahead and go with demonstrate. Now for this phys ed class, demonstrate, that is observable and measurable because it's going to be a performance task and I could see a checklist that the teacher might have. But when I go into my next one, I have analyze and improve performance of self and or others in a selected skill. So in this one, what are they going to analyze? They can analyze their own performance in the bent arm hang for areas to improve. Then the next piece is they actually have to improve their performance of self and or others. So as I'm thinking here about what is observable and measurable, what I would want them to do is actually list 2 ways to improve performance and share with a partner. So now what I've done is I've created possible ways that a student could demonstrate or show what the point of the standard was, and I've made it precise enough that a teacher could read it and go, I know exactly what lesson plan I need to do to develop those pieces. So those are the demonstrations of unpacking. Hopefully you can use any of the skills you witnessed here in your own unpacking. Thank you very much.